Because Hashem Yisborach was starting Hilchos Korban Pesach, we're learning the Hakdama, Daf Aleph. We learn Hilchos Korban Pesach Yesh B'Klalon. Altogether, there are 16 mitzvahs. There are 16 mitzvahs. Our mitzvahs are say, 4 positive, Ushtem Esrei mitzvahs lo yisesa, and 16 negatives. 12 out of the 16 are negatives. V'zehu Porton. These are their particulars. Lishchut is a Pesach bismanoi. On the 15th of Nisan to shech the Korban Pesach. Shlo yizbeach Yisrael Chometz. Not to slaughter the Korban Pesach on Chometz. Shlo yitol an emur. Not to leave the emur, which have to be brought on the Mizbeach, remain overnight. Lishchut Pesach Sheni. If you can't bring the Pesach Rishon, you bring the Pesach Sheni. If you're Tomei. Le'echol bosar Pesach al matzos moro b'leil chamisha also. To eat the meat of the Korban Pesach, that itself is a separate din. To eat it on the 15th. Le'echol Pesach Sheni al matzos moro b'leil chamisha also l'chodesh hasheni. To eat Pesach Sheni, when? On the 15th day of the second month, which is Iyar. The 7th mitzvah is sheloi le'achol no mavushal. You cannot eat a Korban Pesach either raw or cooked. The 8th mitzvah is sheloi yoitzi mibosa Pesach chutz l'chabura, that you're not permitted to take the bosa Pesach outside of the chabura. Sheloi yochol mimenu muma. Somebody who does not believe in Hashem cannot eat from the Korban Pesach. Even if they're a goy who believes in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach and they're allowed to leave in the Eretz Yisrael, still they can't eat from the Korban Pesach. A Jew who's uncircumcised, even if it's for medical reasons, is not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. That you should not break a bone in the Korban Pesach. This rule of breaking a bone also applies to Pesach Sheni. Shaloi Yisha mimenu ad boiker. There shouldn't be yashia mimenu ad boiker. There should be nothing left over from it until the next morning. Shleyasin Pesach Sheni la boiker. The same applies to Pesach Sheni. Cannot be left. It's a separate lav. Even though in his shiur mitzvahs, the Rambam explains why these are considered separate mitzvahs as opposed to one. Shleyashim ibosa chagigas abosa ad yom shlishi. That means that the chagiga that was brought on the 14th, if a person did not have enough people on the Korban Pesach to eat a kezayis, or they couldn't finish everyone only received a kezayis, and therefore they needed to supplement it because the Korban Pesach has to be eaten on a full stomach, or close to a full stomach. Then you brought a chagiga, so you had what to eat, and the last bit of meat was the Korban Pesach. And the explanation for all these mitzvahs, the Rambam says, is going to be learned in the next program. We're beginning Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. The mitzvah say Lishchit is a Pesach ba'abos l'chodesh Nisan. The mitzvah of shechting the Korban Pesach is on the 14th of Nisan, and we'll go below to the Peirush, because it says V'shofto oiseko ka'al adas Yisrael bein ha'aboyim. This is a very important word to remember. Bein ha'aboyim. All of Klal Yisrael should slaughter it. It says ka'al adas Yisrael. We're going to learn something from that as well. Bein ha'aboyim. That tells you the specific time that has to be eaten. Peirush Chazal tell us that that's between the afternoon and the night. And one can only eat from the kvosim or from the izim. It can't be from boker. It cannot be cattle. Zochor has to be a male. Ben shona, and it has to be less than a year old. Why? Because it says in the posuk, set tomim zochor, has to be complete. It has to be a male. Ben shona yilachem, and it can only be min hakvosim min izim tikochu. These are limitations and not cattle. The Hilchos Chametz has a question. If the mitzvah also takes in the idea of all the work service of the korban till zrikas adam, and also bringing up the emurim, and if something wasn't done, the mitzvah was not accomplished, or the mitzvah is only to slaughter it. From the Peirush, the Reim, the way he says his language, So the language he uses, it would seems that it's the shchita and the zrikas domim and hekter chalav, but this does not include eating the korban pesach. It would seem that logically, according to the Rambam, the mitzvah is to slaughter it, not the other parts of the avodah. They're only something that's necessary to accomplish the obligation. If he wasn't zerek the dam, or didn't do the other avodas, he did not keep the mitzvah. But the mitzvah that a person has to do is shlit Pesach. Therefore, he says there's a lotion of to slaughter the Pesach. He doesn't mention the bringing of the Pesach because the shlit is the mitzvah, the special mitzvah, which is on the person. And if he sends a shliach, it will help to keep the mitzvah because that accomplishes the mitzvah. That's only when you slaughter the Pesach. However, Zrikas Adam, which does not, a person has no obligation to do because he can't do it. Only the Kahanim can do it, and certainly, as we pass in the Kahanim Shluchei Rachmonenu, therefore, it would seem that a person's main obligation to fulfillment of the mitzvah is slaughtering it. The Amir is going to ask a question on Korban Pesach that the Rambam left out. We found in the Gemara, we learned the difference between Pesach that they brought in Mitzrayim and Pesach that they brought throughout the generations, as is when you had to take it on the 10th of the month or not. Pesach Mitzrayim you have to take on the 10th because it says you should take it on Pesach of the Doiris throughout the generations. There was no obligation of the 10th. Still, they said on Pesach Doiris you have to check it from a moon 4 days before. That's called Bikur. And the same way that you do Bikur to make sure there's no moon in the Pesach and the Korban for Tomid we learn as well. We learn from Tomid. So we have to be Mavakir the Korban Tomid. In other words, these two are learned one from the other. And the Rambam Paskins, Hilchos Chametz, that they had to prepare the Tomid 4 days before they bought it. And according to the Rambam, should have mentioned by Korban Pesach also that you have to check it. And furthermore, the halacha is the Korban Pesach is posel if they didn't do it for 4 days before Shchita. If you shecht it on a Shabbos, a Korban that's posel, it'd be chayav achatos because it was posel to begin with. Still, the Rambam doesn't mention any of this. That you don't also that you don't have to check out the Korban Pesach Sheni 4 days before you bring it, even though it's from the differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. The Kapos Tzmorim understood in the Rambam that there's no bigger. It's not ma'akiv. Where's his source? The Radvaz says, the Rambam understood from the Gemara that Pesach Doris you don't have to bring it from the 10th. Now the difference from the 10th till the 14th is how many days? 4 days. So 1 day more, 1 day less. It depends how you count the days. On the 4th day, and therefore you learn. Tomid has to have 4 days. You learn from Pesach. And that's why the Rambam in the Teis Yontiv writes, that that's the Rambam, that he didn't learn it from Pesach Doiris, Tomid, only he learned Tomid from Pesach Mitzrayim. Because it says, V'yasu b'nei Yisrael HaPesach b'moi adoi. And they have a Gzeir Shova, the Korban Tomid, that says, Tishmu l'akir lo b'moi adoi. By the Korban Tomid, it says you should bring it b'moi adoi. Therefore, we don't find in the in the Gemara that Pesach Doris needs Bikur of 4 days. Now, there are two thoughts in this regard. If 4 days you count the day of the Shechita, or you count 4 days except for the day of Shechita. According to Rashi, is to count the day of the Shechita, except for the day of the Shechita, because Pesach Mitzrayim, they took on the 10th, and you have 4 days before Nisan, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. But by the Rambam, you're not sure if he's of the opinion to count the day of Shechita or not. And then you would only have to take it, if you do count the day of Shechita, then you would only take it on the 11th. And that's the difference between taking it on the 10th or taking it on the 11th. Both men and women. They say there are three thoughts in this regard. Whether a woman is obligated in Korban Pesach. Yehuda, they slaughter on Pesach Rishon, especially for her. They can be technically even a group only of women. Pesach Sheni, she can eat of the Korban Pesach but it has to be slaughtered for men. Rabbi Yossi, Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni are both obligations for women, and you can slaughter for groups of women in both of them. Rabbi Shimon, Pesach Rishon she is permitted to eat; she has no obligation. And Pesach Sheni, you don't slaughter at all. Now here, Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yossi. In Skuf of Chizkiah HaMelech, it happened that most of the people were Tmeim Be'erev Pesach, and they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach, but the women were Torah. The halacha is that if the minority are Tmeim, then they bring a Pesach Sheni. But if the majority of Yisrael are Tmeim, what do? You make a Pesach Rishon, because Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur. Tumah was permitted, was overridden. Korban Pesach is considered in a sense, a general korban, just like the korban Tomid, which is brought for everyone, which is done on Shabbos as well, and it's done with Tumah because Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur. So Chizkiah thought that it's not, the women are not counted, and the men, therefore, they do not cause the men to be the majority, the Tmeim to be the majority, because the men weren't the majority. And therefore, the reverse, because the women were Tar, even though all the men were Tameh, therefore, there was no majority. Therefore, the men would have to bring in Pesach Sheni, and everyone else who was Tar from the men with the women would bring in the first Korban Pesach, which is, and at the end, he understood that he made a mistake because women are not chayiv at Pesach Rishon, and you can't add them to the cheshbon. Therefore, when you count whether Klal Yisrael is Torah Tmeim, which is, it says Yosu Kulam in Pesach Rishon, is because the majority, all the men were Tomei. He asked a question: how could the Rambam paskin not like the Gemara that in Noshim and Pesach Rishon are obligatory? The Gemara there says that Chizkiah HaMelech decided that they are not counted in the count, and he explains that goes according to Rab Shimon, as we learned above. Rab Shimon says that Pesach Rishon, she's also not obligated, and that's. But Rabbi Yossi will assume that the Rambam paskins like him. Rabbi Yehuda will hold that he made a mistake, not b'din tumah, only that he made a mistake of the, as you learned the Gemara there, where he learned that one of the three mistakes that he did was that he made the extra month of Nisan, and you can't make the extra month only till the 29th of Adar. Mosdos says mitzvah that even those that have Purim and mitzvahs aliyah l'regel, so he doesn't have karka, still he is obligated with Korban Pesach, and therefore the Rambam writes that Noshim are obligated with Korban Pesach, even though they don't have a chiyuv of aliyah l'regel. But Tosis and Psochim were mechadish. They have a novel approach. Who somebody is part of a mitzvah shriya and Yontif is part also of a mitzvah Korban Pesach. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira did not go up from Netzil to Yerushalayim because he had since he had no land. And somebody who doesn't have land is part of a mitzvah shriya. Or because Netzivim was like Chutz La'aretz. The Mishnah Melech questions, where did they learn this din? After the Gemara doesn't say you put him Korban Pesach, only a zokin can't eat a kezayis, but not because he can't go up to regel. And even we'll say that the sea was like Chutz La'aretz, therefore he didn't go up because he's outside of Eretz Yisrael. Still, he'll have to do Pesach Sheni. Only he'll say he's further than 15 mil that he's parted from entirely. And he ends that Divrei Tosfos seem to be something that needs greater study. The Yaivis questions if Bisman Hamikdash Bnei Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz are obligated to go up L'regel to Eretz Yisrael for the festival. If they're potter, if they were chayav b'korban Pesach. He brings some toises. The Anshi Chutz La'aretz are p'turim b'korban Pesach because he says Yehuda was in Chutz La'aretz. Another proof, he writes. The Melech Sholem writes that the Rambam Paskins, somebody was sick that was in Yerushalayim and he couldn't get to the Azorah until time passed. He's an honest, and from this we can learn that Zokin, when he can't go a great distance, he has no obligation to go to make the Pesach in Yerushalayim. He asks further. Toises say the obligation of Riyah of Oiles Regel is the same as for Pesach. If Korban Pesach, if you don't do it, it's a chorus. Oile Riyah is a mitzvah, you're mevatel la'aseh, and according to him, it doesn't have to do with Testament of Mil, because Eretz Yisrael is big greater than Testament of Mil. Still we see Chizkiyo made a proclamation, and all Eretz Yisrael from Beersheba till Don to do Pesach L'Hashem Elokei Yisrael b'Yerushalayim. But it must be that 30 days before Pesach is an obligation to get close to Yerushalayim, to be able to come in time. And somebody who's further than that is called an onus. Another two Achronim want to say that those who are in Chutz La'aretz are posted from Korban Pesach. One is Ben Ari al Rambam. He says, besides Yerushalmi and Psochim, that it's mashma that somebody in Chutz La'aretz is potter. And the Shash, also in Bereishis Rabbah, seems to say that that's the case. According to the Rambam, that everyone is obligated to do a Korban Pesach because he doesn't say if you're chayiv or potter.